encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. My name is Robert Hatfield, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things preaching and ministry. Welcome to Season 13, Episode 5 of the podcast. And once again, on this episode, we want to return to somewhat of a recurring theme. I'm really dedicating myself to being more intentional about producing podcast episodes that are encouraging, especially for ministers and preachers. And that's where we find ourselves today, as we're going to be discussing why you need to stick with ministry. And here to help us discuss that is no stranger to Preachers in Training, Andy Brewer, joining us from where he labors at the Phillips Street congregation in Dyersburg, Tennessee. Welcome back, man. It's been too long. I'm glad to have you back.
It's good to be back, Robert. Always good to be with you on the program, and I know talking about something that's very near and dear to both of our hearts.
Yeah, without a doubt. Absolutely. You were on like some of the back in season 0 days, as I recall, maybe even the first episode or two. I should have gone back and checked, but thanks for always being a willing guinea pig for the show.
I'm more than willing to, like I told you in the message you sent me, I'm just shocked that you keep asking me to come on. I can't imagine that anything I've said has been that valuable, but you're making me feel that way, so I appreciate that anyway.
Why you should stick with coming on the Preachers in Training podcast. No, okay.
That's right.
So how long have you been in Dyersburg at Phillips Street? It's been a while.
It's been a little over 10 years now.
Whoa.
We moved here in September of 2010.
That's great.
So about 10 and a half years, going on 11 now.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And things are going well in spite of what I'm sometimes calling the present distress, to borrow from 1 Corinthians 7.
They are. It's a lot of up and down. Phillips Street has experienced a lot of up and down over the last many years anyway, for different reasons. But we're holding our own. We've actually seen not an uptick in total attendance through the present distress, as you called it, but we've actually ended up with, I think, 3 new families in the midst of all of this, which has been surprising to me. Of course, we've got a lot of folks that haven't come back at all yet. We are a much older congregation demographically, and so we've got a lot of folks that they just aren't getting out at all. Yeah. And some, I don't know if they ever will or not. So, I mean, our total attendance is obviously taken somewhat of a dip, like I think everybody's has.
Yeah, yeah.
But we've been blessed through it all anyway, so we're just going to keep on pushing on, and the Lord's going to bless us. So. Yeah,
you're right. It's amazing how all this is shifting our perspectives on things, including attendance metrics and some of that sort of stuff too. I don't know about what you're hearing. What I'm hearing on this end is some of the older Christians that we have, they're saying, listen, the only reason I'm getting these shots is so I can come back to church. And some of them are telling me, we just got shot number 2, and in a few more weeks, we're going to be there. So I'm looking forward to that. We got some celebration ahead.
That's right. A big old family reunion.
That's right. So today we want to talk about why you should stick with ministry. And 10 years alone there at Phillips Street, I should say that you're someone who's committed to sticking with ministry. Is that safe to say?
I hope so. I was actually thinking the other day, I've been at Phillips Street for 10 years, but I've been preaching, on a every Sunday basis for 20 years now. And it's hard for me to believe it's been that long, but mm-hmm. I had just turned 17 when I started my first work with a little church a couple of towns over from where I lived, and it wasn't supposed to be like that. I was only filling in for a few weeks until the regular preacher came back.
That's the way it happens.
7 years later, he never came back. So I got into it really green, but with a great group of people who were very patient with me and endured through a lot of growing pains on my part and let me do a lot of growing up over 7 years with them before I got into, I guess you would call, full-time ministry. But yeah, I'm planning on being in it for the long run, as long as the Lord continues to find a use for me and the brethren will continue to put up with me. So
That is wonderful. We could talk about current trends and because of the COVID stuff and hey, listen, anybody could sing a sad song, right, about maybe the pressures that the coronavirus has, directly or indirectly added to our job, just like anybody else's quote unquote job or workload. We could talk about the trends even pre-COVID, right? And how, the pressures of ministry can get to us at times. And they all do. I appreciate the Jenkins Institute coming out. I've seen their latest book is Don't Quit on a Friday. They started with Monday. So, don't quit on any of those days. And the implication there is we might be tempted to quit and probably are on any one of those weekdays or even on the weekends. But to stick with it is what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm looking forward to the positivity of this. As we get started today, I think you want to give us 5 reasons why we should not quit. And I'm intrigued by these and the 5 things that you've chosen. I know you spent some time thinking about these. Where do we need to begin on this episode?
Well, I do. I've got 5 reasons not to quit, and I think this is something that probably everybody has had thoughts about at some point along the way. I mean, I'd be lying if I said in the last 20 years that I had never had a single thought about whether this was actually what I ought to be doing. I think everybody, every preacher, probably at some point in their career asked questions like, am I really making a difference in what I'm doing? Or could I more effectively serve in another area? Could I better support my family if I was working a better job, another job? Why do I have to put up with mistreatments or the trials or the trouble or the difficulties or whatever I may be facing? And so I think on a regular basis, whether we're having those questions in the current moment or not, it's always good to ever so often regularly re-examine our motivation for remaining in ministry and reminding ourselves of why we got into it and what we're hoping to accomplish, why we're working the way that we are, and so 5 reasons that I don't think if you are currently engaged in ministry and you're doing all that you can, you're doing it for the right reasons. All of those motivations are right down the line. Some reasons why we shouldn't quit, and the first reason that I think we need to think about is this. We shouldn't quit because the kingdom needs us. As preachers, the kingdom needs us. The New Testament really clearly lays out the fact that preaching is an essential work of the church. If you want to throw in some current distress language here, we are the quintessential essential workers.
That's right. Yeah.
Our job is important. And, that may not be the way everybody looks at it, but biblically, that's the way God looks at it. Preaching is an essential work of the church. And so that makes preachers an essential part of the church. And I want to ask a question just for self-examination along these lines. What if every preacher who had ever thought about quitting actually did? Would there be anybody left?
Right.
Because I think everybody has probably, again, had these thoughts somewhere along the line. If every preacher who ever thought about quitting actually did it, would there be any preachers left? So we don't need to minimize the extent of our work or the value of our work. The kingdom needs preachers. We have a very important work to do. So I don't know if there's anything you want to throw in on that one or not, but
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. And you're right. I mean, everybody feels like we want to quit at one point or another. If you as a preacher or a minister have never felt that, please email me and let me know, because maybe we need to interview you to talk with you a bit about
Yeah, they need to
how you're
share the
doing
secret formula.
it. Share the secret formula. I was thinking, you said you were looking over the last 20 years, and I jokingly thought, for me, it might be the last 20 minutes. I mean, it's not that frequently. I'm saying that in jest, but at the same time, some of the things you mentioned at the beginning there, am I able to adequately support my family? Is this where I can be the most effective and do the most good? I mean, those are heavy questions. So, we're not merely saying don't quit just because of the nobility of the role of preaching, certainly to the life of the church and to helping other people. But at the same time, this point that you're making here, the Lord does have a place for preaching, and we could take the if not us then who kind of approach, although hey, listen, there may come a time when it might be appropriate for you to transition out or to do something different. Certainly that's within the realm of possibility, but we're saying we're going to go through a lot of different stages of real deep contemplation and prayer before we would go to a place like that. And the first thing we need to think about is we're needed. In spite
That's
of, by
right.
the way, the fact that maybe sometimes we're either intentionally or unintentionally made to feel as though we are non-essential or that we are not needed, whether that's in our own heads or being fed to us from some other source.
Yeah, and I actually had this note written or typed in my notes, and I just kind of skipped over it to get right into the meat of the discussion. But I remember a teacher that I had once making the comment with regard to preaching. He said, if you can do anything else but preach, then you should.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the context he was saying that in, so I'm not saying that I disagree with that comment. I actually agree with it in the context he was saying,
Yeah.
because he was talking about the level of commitment that we should have to preaching. And I think in that context, he was exactly right.
Yeah.
Because if over time we figure out that our hearts aren't truly into ministry, and we're just staying in it just because that's all that we really know, and we kind of live in fear of taking that step out of ministry and into a different kind of career, we shouldn't stay in ministry just out of a sense of obligation or fear, because I mean, if we do that, nothing productive is going to come out of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Ministry isn't something that we should do just because we don't have any other options.
Yeah.
It's something that we've got to want to do. It's got to be something that we're committed to doing. So if we're in ministry for any other reason than a love for God and a love for His work, we're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, we should get out. So
Yeah.
these aren't reasons that somebody who does need to get out of ministry should stay in it just because. We're talking about someone who's got all the motivations correct, who does have a love for the work, who does want to continue in ministry, but they just don't see a path forward.
Yeah.
That kind of person, number one, they need to see that the kingdom does need them. They are valuable to the work and essential to the work. And I think the more they realize that, the more they're going to be motivated to stay in it.
Yeah. Great point.
All right. Reason number two. We need to remember that ministry is the single most important work in the world. Now, there's a lot of very important jobs in the world that we could not live without. Okay. I'm not minimizing the importance of other jobs. And there's a lot of very important jobs that I couldn't personally do. And I'm so thankful for those who are able and who are willing.
Me too.
But ministry is the one job that doesn't just touch this world. Ministry touches eternity. And that's what makes it the most important. I think about preaching the gospel in such a way that if you're preaching the gospel and you take any other job, ultimately it's a demotion in terms of potential impact that you can make. Because you're in preaching the gospel and ministry, you're helping to lead people to heaven. And if you're looking for a job with purpose, There's not a better one out there.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's value in just saying this out loud sometimes. I mean, I guess.
I assure you, none of this that I'm saying today is groundbreaking stuff.
No, well, and I don't necessarily mean it like that. I'm just saying that here's something that maybe we know intellectually, but sometimes in the low moments we don't maybe feel emotionally. But just to reconnect with the facts, I mean, what we're doing is more than just, filling a speaking slot once a week. Yeah, we're doing more than just creating or churning out content. That's something else I've heard, lately. I just feel like I'm churning out content or I'm teaching all the time. Well, maybe you are, and maybe now's the perfect time to be doing that. I mean, because to your point, ministry is the most important thing. So, thanks for saying it.
I didn't say that to mean that I thought you were minimizing what I was saying.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, nothing that I'm going to say is going to be groundbreaking. This is all stuff that's just, generally true that I think everybody knows. But like you said, saying it out loud kind of brings a different feel to it, because some of these things are things that as preachers, I think we have a hard time saying out loud sometimes, because we don't want it to look like we're seeking glory or we want sympathy from people or anything like that. We don't. But at the same time, we need to be reminded of our value. Mm-hmm. And we need to be reminded of how important the work we're doing is. Because if we're not, then what's going to be the motivation for us to stay in it? That's what I mean when I say, this isn't groundbreaking stuff, but it's stuff that just generally needs to be said out loud so that we're reminded of it.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Number 3, you shouldn't quit, because I think the odds are if you do quit, then you'll probably end up regretting it. Now, I don't have statistics on this. I'm sure there may be some out there, and I didn't think far enough ahead of time to try to collect them. But I think everybody got into ministry for a reason. And as long as that reason was honorable to begin with, and I think most preachers got into ministry for honorable reasons, then when you stop, you'll more than likely regret stepping back on the purpose that made you start to begin with. I think about John Mark in the book of Acts. He accompanied Paul and Barnabas on that first missionary journey. And what ended up coming of John Mark during that journey? He quit, didn't he? The work was too much for him, and so he just turned back, I think it says. And something, and we don't necessarily know what it is, but something apparently made him regret that he quit on that first journey. Because we see that when Paul and Barnabas started organizing their second trip, that he ended up going back, not with Paul, because Paul wouldn't let him back, but Barnabas, when he went off on his own, he went back with Barnabas. And so something in John Mark made him regret turning his back on the work to begin with. And thankfully, he was given the opportunity to make a fresh start, and he took that opportunity. But I've wondered if through the rest of John Mark's life, if he ever let go of the regret that he had from quitting in the first place. Now, he might have. I don't know. And I'm not saying it would have been wrong if he had been able to let go of it. But I don't know if I would have been able to let go of that regret, regardless of how much good that I was able to do from that point moving forward. There's a reason that I got into ministry. There's a reason you got into ministry. There's a reason everybody that's in ministry got into it. And when we get to the point that maybe we do quit, we're not just giving up on ministry in the abstract. We're giving up on the very reasons that we got into ministry. And I think that's something that most men, if they're put in that position, are going to live to regret at some point in their lives.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. I think that for some of us, sometimes what we think from the outside looking in, what we think will be true, and then what ends up being true once you're on the inside looking back out is often maybe a little bit different. I think some ministers struggle with battling cynicism or maybe even just pessimism, because they do encounter maybe some unfortunate circumstances, or maybe some individuals who claim to be Christians who, don't model Christianity the way the New Testament says we should. And that's all real. I guess everybody's going to go through that. But yeah, you're right. There's a purpose, and the purpose must include some. Sometimes I've jokingly said that, people like that who are a little cantankerous or whatever, I call that job security. I say, if there weren't things to preach about, then I guess they wouldn't need me. And obviously there's more reasons to preach, and certainly we do more in preaching than just preach to issues and things that are going on. But at the same time, you're right. The mission that we have, and the reason why, what we want to hope to accomplish for God's glory, the reason why we got into it, certainly speaks to the kingdom need that you just mentioned, and also the single most important work in the world that you mentioned in the first 2 points as well.
Yeah. And, I remember, hearing a friend of mine who's a preacher here in West Tennessee make the comment one time years ago that, the more he thought about it, the more he realized he has the best job in the world, or we as preachers have the best job in the world. But sometimes things do get so difficult that, we kind of get to thinking, well, is the grass greener on the other side?
Yeah.
Would life be better outside of ministry? Not quitting on the Lord altogether. We're not talking about abandoning Christianity, but just getting out of ministry. And, I think some get out of ministry and maybe they never regret it. Maybe they go on and live perfectly fulfilled lives. They stay faithful to the Lord. They go to heaven, all of that.
Yeah.
But I've got a feeling that there's probably a lot of men out there who do end up giving up on ministry. And they look back and they realize that when they were engaged in full-time ministry, that there was a unique opportunity there that for whatever reason they lost when they had to take on other responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's probably a lot of regrets that could be included in there. I'm just kind of leaving it generic, obviously, but
yeah.
I think the odds are that someone who got into the work for the right reason, but ended up quitting at some point down the line, is going to end up regretting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good warning.
All right, number 4. I think somebody who's thinking about quitting needs to hear that you're doing better than you think you are. You're probably doing better in ministry than you think you are. I think a lot of guys who end up quitting in ministry probably do so, at least among one of the reasons being they don't really think they're having the impact that they want to have, or maybe they're looking at the fruit of other people's ministries and they say, well, I'm not as effective as them, so maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I think among those who would quit or consider quitting ministry, one of the rationales they have in their minds is their productivity in the kingdom, and how that productivity in their minds isn't equal to their trials. But I've learned, man, and I think you'd agree with me, we are our absolute own worst enemies when it comes to personal critiques.
Yes.
I think that's true when it comes to sermons, and I think it's true when it comes to our work in general. But I'd be willing to bet that if you were to ask an objective outside source, that is outside of that person, maybe, just the average member in the congregation they serve, or maybe just even a person in the community that knows them, and ask them how that same person is doing with their work, they would probably say that they're doing much better than that person thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because sometimes we are so close to the work that we're involved in that we have a hard time seeing the bigger picture of what our impact in ministry really is. We tend to look at things individually and maybe focus on those individual areas where maybe we're at our weakest, while other people may just be looking at our ministry, the job we're doing as a whole. And I think when we do that, we're going to see that we're doing a lot better than we really think we are.
Mm-hmm. This is such a fantastic point. Have you seen that meme with the older man and he has a white beard and he's got a cup of coffee and it says, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing."
I've actually shared that meme on occasion.
Yes. Well, and I have too, and I deeply relate to it. But yeah, at the same, and often I feel that way, and maybe it's because, my brain was just scattered on Sunday morning or Wednesday when I was teaching, or maybe it was because somebody came and met with me and I just didn't feel like I did a great job counseling them. I didn't tell them to do anything wrong or anything, but yeah, I could have done better or been better prepared or whatever. You're right. We're our own worst critics. I have heard some brothers say that when they moved from one work to another, and for whatever reason they did that, right? But when they moved, they had a clarity on the former work that if they could have had that, then when they were still there, maybe not necessarily that it would have changed, the move or whatever, but they felt they would have been more effective. And there is something about maybe coming apart and praying for a while, so coming away for a minute and sort of refreshing and getting a 30,000 foot perspective maybe, or something like that. Is there a way, I'm going to put you on the spot, is there a way that you sort of get a fresh perspective or back up a little bit? I mean, vacations, retreats, anything like that kind of helps you after being in one place for 10 plus years?
Not really. I think the one thing that maybe helps me to be a little bit more comfortable with maybe where I'm at in ministry here just has to do with the continued relationship I have with my elders and with the members here.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I have such good camaraderie with everybody, I guess I look at that and I think, well, I must be doing something right. I know I do a lot wrong, and I don't say that to think I've got it all together, but if we're functioning cohesively and lovingly and as one as a congregation, and I'm working well with my elders, and people, new people are coming and want to be here all the time, then you see that forward trajectory. And I think that does help. But at the same time, I obviously have a lot more Sundays than I don't that I think about the sermon I preached and I'm not happy with it, or I think about, well, it's been this many weeks since somebody's walked down the aisle and responded to the invitation, or I'm not doing this right, or I could do this better, or this is going wrong. But I think when you look at ministry and you think about the total impact, not just in the power of the sermons you preach or in the number of people that walk down the aisle, but I think if you were to talk to somebody in the congregation and you were to ask them, objectively, how do you think I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
While we might think they would judge us, based on the clarity of our sermons or the number of people that come down the aisle or this, that, or the other, they would probably think about more so, well, I like the job you're doing because, when my husband or wife died, or when my parent died, you were there with me.
Yeah.
Or, when we were struggling through this, you were there, we were able to talk to you. Or, I mean, I'm not saying that the power of sermons or the number of people responding to the invitation is unimportant, but at the same time, we need a little bit more clarity, again, as to, like you said, the 30,000 foot, view of what we're doing as a whole. And I think we compartmentalize it way too much, while more people tend to look at the total job we're doing. And if we could do the same thing, I think we would perhaps be a little bit happier with the job that we're doing than sometimes we really are.
Yeah, agreed. And it's a long game, right? Ministry is a long game. It's not, this sermon or this series or this class or whatever. It's the long game that counts. Yeah, absolutely. So you're doing better than you think you are. I love that point. What's the fifth reason why we should not quit?
last one, you, I think, are uniquely qualified to reach some people that others may not be able to.
Hmm.
Ministry is largely about relationships. I don't really have to say that. I think everybody knows that, but I only say it to make a larger point that when you move into a congregation and you move into a community, the odds are that as a preacher, you have built relationships with people in the community that you serve that if you were to quit, they may never be reached. Now, they could be, but there's a very good possibility that they may never be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand the power is in the gospel and the power is in the kingdom more so than us. But, somebody's got to represent the kingdom and somebody's got to share the gospel. And that's where that relationship that we have to build with people in our congregations and in our communities comes from. That's where the importance resides.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to quit, the one link that some people in your community have to the church and the one link that some people in your community have to the gospel would be gone.
Yeah.
And for them, it very well could be gone forever. Now, granted, somebody else could come in and possibly make a connection with them, but there's also the possibility they may not. They may go on and build relationships with other people, and these people may be completely forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to be reminded sometimes that we are individually uniquely qualified to reach some people around us that other people may not necessarily be able to.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And when you step out, that you're right, that breaks that tie. At the very least, it takes everything back to square one, right?
Yeah.
Where the new guy's got to come in, and even if your contact is on the new person's radar, he still has to start all over with building trust in a relationship. So something to consider. 5 reasons we should not quit. Number 1, you said the kingdom needs us. Number 2, ministry is the single most important work in the world. 3, the odds are that if you do quit, you'll probably end up regretting it. 4, you're doing better than you think you are. And 5, you're uniquely qualified to reach some people that others cannot reach. Solid reasons. Thanks for saying them. I'm really, really appreciative. Now, what if somebody is currently thinking about quitting? Do we have some thoughts for them today?
Absolutely. And as should be the case with any preacher program, I've got 5 of them.
Of course you do.
So I've got it laid out in perfect outline form. All right. So maybe somebody's maybe they're on the fence, like you said. They've been dealing with some hardships for some time. They're not approaching this lightly, but after a lot of thought and a lot of tears and a lot of heartache, maybe they're really giving serious consideration to quitting. What are some things that they need to do before they make that final decision? The first one I think that needs to be done is maybe they need to take some time away. Is he using his vacation time? I think most preachers are given at least some time away. Now, maybe it may not be adequate to the need, but I don't know of anybody that doesn't have at least a week or two at least built in to where they could take. Are you taking vacation time? Are you taking advantage of seminars and workshops and lectureships to go in and be rejuvenated? Is it to the point that maybe you could use a sabbatical? That's not something we really talk about a whole lot. And honestly, I think I've only heard of one person in Churches of Christ that's even brought this up.
Yeah.
I know Jerry Barber has talked a lot about this, and he's talked about, working that into contracts in places he's been in the past. Maybe there's other guys out there that have done this and I just don't know about them. But I think it's something worth investigating for a lot of guys, and maybe even for all of us at some point, because, there is a point at which you need to get away. It may just be for a day or two. It may need to be for a week. Maybe it needs to be for a month or so. But maybe uh, at the very least, we should be taking advantage of all of the vacation time we have, and whatever time we may have built in that we can take advantage of seminars and workshops and whatever. Getting away from the work, I think it doesn't just recharge us in terms of you know, giving us the direction we need. Well, I'm thinking like going to polishing the pulpit or maybe to a lectureship or something,
Mm-hmm.
and you get some good practical advice. But in the same way, it also, I don't know if everybody can say this, but if I'm gone for a week or maybe a little bit over a week or something like that, I actually miss the work, and I'm looking forward to coming back and kind of digging my heels in and going at it again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some guys, it may get beyond that. It may get beyond just a week or so. I don't think there's any harm in over a number of years. Now, somebody doesn't need to come to a congregation and after a year say, all right, I did a 3-month sabbatical. But, maybe when a guy's been in a place for 7, 10, 12, 15 years, a month away or maybe even a couple of months away would be good for both him and the congregation to get away, to do a lot of thinking, to do a lot of praying, to do a lot of planning, and then to come back and after a month or two of being away, coming back to the exact same place you've been for 10 or 15 years can really, I would imagine, feel like a brand new work.
Yeah, that's right.
So I would say to somebody that's honestly talking about quitting, the first thing they need to do is be intentional about taking some time away to recreate, to re-energize, and to do a lot of thinking and praying about it, and see where they're at when all of that is over.
Mm-hmm. Implicit in this is that you're going to be honest and upfront with someone else, right? Because if you're going to take some time away, I assume you're going to coordinate that with another. Otherwise, you might not have any place to come back to.
That's right. You're going to be taking a long sabbatical.
That's right. Yeah. Extended sabbatical with a move involved. But so, being transparent. First we have to sort of be self-aware to know that what we're feeling is maybe more than just something I can push through, or a week or two will help, or a round of golf, or whatever your thing is.
Yeah.
But then to be upfront and say, talk to your elders or maybe key leaders or whomever, and hey, this is sort of what I'm feeling. Here's why it's not just your run of the mill thing. I've experienced this, and this, now what I'm having now is that. This is something else, and maybe go from there. But yeah, you're right. I love that. Take some time away.
Yeah, and I think you said you used the words "be honest with yourself," and I think that's spot on because I think this is true in a lot of professions, but I think it's true particularly with preachers as well. I know of guys who take a lot of pride in the amount of hours they work, and we should work hard. Okay, don't get me wrong. We should work. We should show up to work. We should work a full day for a full day's pay. We should do what we're being paid to do and what the Lord wants us to do.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's nothing valiant about working without a break and working ourselves mentally and maybe even physically to death. I think people understand, society at large understands the value of a break, and even Jesus found the need at times to take a break from the brethren and go and be away by himself. And if Jesus did that, we're not too good or too strong or too whatever to do the same thing. Everybody needs to take some time away in whatever form that looks like.
Yeah.
It may not be a week long vacation where it costs $3,000 or $4,000. Maybe it's just a week at home where you're able to sleep in a little bit more and spend more time with your family and go for a walk. That can look like something different to any number of people. But the point is just to get away from the work and allow that time away to re-energize you to come back and do what you know that you can do for the Lord.
Yeah, that's right. All right, take some time away. What's the second thing?
Number two, find someone to talk to.
Hmm.
don't try to go through this struggle on your own. I think about preaching kind of like a pressure cooker. If you don't allow that pressure cooker to vent properly, what's going to happen? Well, eventually all that pressure is going to build up and it's going to explode.
Hmm.
And I've known of guys who've been in that situation where they just allow the pressure to just, keep mounting itself down on them, and they never vented, and they never talked it out, and they never took time away. And over a period of years, that pressure built up to the point to where they just exploded. And not only did that cause them to leave ministry, but maybe for some of them it caused enough hard feelings that it even caused them to leave the church altogether. I think venting or just talking to someone helps relieve some of the pressure that just comes naturally with the work that we're doing, and can help put situations in our lives into a better perspective. Now, that may be an older preacher that we look at as kind of a mentor that's traveled the road we have, that's dealt with the situations we have. It may be a friend who's a preacher, a friend in ministry who maybe they're currently dealing with what we're dealing with. It may be somebody else altogether. I don't know. Some guys may even get to the point where they need to talk to somebody who has professional training. I don't know. But the point is, find somebody to talk to about this and hash it out and let them give some perspective and advice and direction. And, maybe things can be resolved without taking that next step.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And absolutely, it's helpful even on this podcast for me personally, to get to talk with people like you and to hear you saying things with which I can relate. It's like, I've been there. Andy's saying these 5 things because he knows what that's like, and I know what this is like too. Yeah, and I know you're not saying this. It is important that as we're talking with people, first of all, that obviously we're choosing trustworthy people. You mentioned that, somebody that you can confide in. That's going to limit some things, right? I mean, there may be things that in certain situations that our spouse may or may not need to be privy to based on what might be helpful for her, or if it could be spiritually damaging for her to know about this or that. Then maybe she doesn't need to know that. Certainly confidentiality needs to come into play even with her as well. I'm thinking about, it may not be wise to confide in your eldership. It may be, depends on the relationship you have, right? You'll have to discuss that and think through that. And then I'm thinking too, sometimes when preachers get together, it's great for us to talk, but sometimes it just degenerates into a complaining session. And so, while I'm wholeheartedly amening what you said, and I know why you said it, I just thought maybe to come on the other side to say, but let's be careful about it, that we keep it healthy and productive. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it could add to the difficulty instead of helping to alleviate it.
And it only elongates and perpetuates, and maybe even drives us to make the decision. Yeah, I am going to quit because of this. So counterproductive.
But, and I think along those lines, I think back to a congregation I was working with, not my current one, but a congregation I had been working with that I loved, and that most of the people there loved us and treated us far better than we deserved. But there was an element in the congregation that made things difficult on me personally to an extent that I wasn't used to, and I didn't really know how to react to. And that caused me a little bit of difficulty mentally, and it caused me a little bit of difficulty in the way that I dealt with things then at a young age, and probably didn't deal with them in the best way possible. But I'll say this: in talking to friends, particularly in that situation, it was more so peers, guys my own age that maybe I had gone to school with, or maybe that I just knew from ministry. And I would talk to them about some of the struggles I was facing. And then I would hear them talk about some of the struggles they were facing. And I say this half jokingly, half not jokingly. When we started airing out the difficulties we were facing, and I heard what they were facing, it made me realize what I was experiencing really wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Mm.
I came to realize that even though I was dealing with some tough stuff that I wasn't used to dealing with and that I didn't really enjoy dealing with, that there were guys out there that had a lot worse than I did,
Mm.
and and it sounds strange, I guess, but it kind of helped me in a sense put things into perspective to know that as bad as it was in my mind, it could have been a lot worse. And so that kind of helped me to work through it a little bit more than maybe I otherwise would have been willing to. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So find somebody to talk to. That's good
advice. Find
advice.
somebody to talk to and hash it out.
Yeah.
All right, number 3, and it's funny, Robert, that just a minute ago you said maybe or maybe not your elders, depending on what your relationship with them is. Number 3 is actually lean on your elders.
All right.
Now, I will say this. You've got to be able and willing to gauge objectively the relationship you have with your elders. I guess I put this down from my perspective because I have a great relationship with my elders.
Mm-hmm.
And I have absolutely no doubt that if I was dealing with some difficulties that were really making me think about my future in ministry, that I could sit down and have an honest conversation with them. And it wouldn't be a conversation like employee versus employer.
Right.
It would be like shepherds trying to help one of their own. That's key. That relationship is key. Mm-hmm. If you have elders that just look at you as an employee, as a hireling, and they're not really concerned with your physical or mental or spiritual well-being, number one, that's a start of a whole nother conversation that we need to be having on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're in a tough spot, and I really do feel for you because I know of guys who've been there and it's been tough on them, and I don't say that lightly. But I'm fortunate to be in a situation where I have elders who are shepherds, and they care about me, and they care about my family, and they care about this congregation. And if there was something in my life or in my work that was really bothering me enough to make me think about quitting ministry, I think they would be more than willing to sit down and listen to me and offer guidance and offer direction and if possible, even personally address those issues themselves. When they first hired me here at Phillips Street, and the eldership I'm working under now is almost entirely different from the one mm-hmm. that I started here with. There's one current elder who's still an elder, one of the ones that hired me originally. Mm. But when we sat down and we talked about us moving here, one of the things that I asked them, and I was as sincere as I possibly could be about, because my goal when I moved here was, this was where we were going to be indefinitely. Mm. That's really been the goal everywhere I've been. It hasn't worked out that way in 2 of the 3, obviously. Yeah. But, when we moved here, our goal was this is where we're going to raise our kids. This is where they're going to start school. This is where they're going to graduate school. This is where I'm going to retire from. And one of these days, the cemetery that I constantly are doing gravesides at, that's where I'm going to be buried. Mm. And so I asked my elders when they hired me, I said, if you ever see me doing anything that you don't like, that if over time could potentially lead you to firing me, I want you to address it with me and allow me the opportunity to correct it. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a courteous thing to do on their end to mine, but as courteous as it would be for them to me, mm-hmm. I think they deserve the same courtesy from me. Yeah. That if I ever saw or were experiencing something in ministry that could make me want to quit on them, they deserve the opportunity to hear about it and to help guide me through it so that we can maintain our working relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. And by the way, let me just say for the record's sake that The elders under whom I serve are exactly the same way. And really, it's been that way. I'm really blessed with everywhere that I've been. When I had a problem, I can go to them, even if it's of a personal nature. And you're right, the shepherding relationship that ought to exist, right? And like you said,
Yeah.
that's a different podcast, but that ought to exist certainly ought to be there. And we ought to utilize that. I guess when I was thinking a little bit earlier, elders love us and they want to shepherd us, and they do, and we ought to give them the opportunity to do that. We also understand that while we as ministers can maybe appreciate some aspects of what it must be like to be an elder, though we are not, sometimes we may uh, be in a position where we can somewhat minister to our elders as shepherds, and just to know they're going through things and all that, but it's not the same. I don't know what it's like to be an elder. And I think the reverse is true, assuming that the elder under whom you serve has not been a minister in the past. Even though he knows a lot about it, he certainly knows what we do, but he's not feeling the pressure as the person who's before the congregation speaking or sitting across the table in a biblical counseling kind of situation or something like that. So anyway, just some context on what I was saying there a minute ago, but absolutely, we ought to lean on them and utilize them especially if we're thinking about quitting. I think that's something our elders deserve to know, and ought to have an opportunity to help us through some of that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, number 4. Look and see if there's any personal changes that you can make in your everyday routine, in your work, in the way that you're approaching ministry. I think a lot of times guys just tend to get into a rut, and they stay in the rut so long that they don't see a way out of the rut other than getting out of the work.
Mm.
So maybe just look at your daily routine or your daily schedule. Have you been doing ministries the way that you have been so long that you're in a rut? I think it's amazing what making even minor changes in our everyday routine or in our work as a whole can do to our psyche.
Mm.
And this is just a personal example, and this may sound really minimal, and it is minimal at its surface. But a few years ago, I'd probably been here 7 or 8 years at that point, and I mean, I wasn't dealing with thoughts of quitting. Don't take this the wrong way, but a few years ago, I had to completely clean my office out
Mm.
because I had a mold problem, and so I had to take all my books out. I had to wipe them down with vinegar. Had
Oh,
to
wow.
take my desk. I mean, it was a complete clean out, clean up, and move back in.
Mm.
But when I moved back into my office, I decided, okay, I've had things set up and arranged for 7 or 8 years at this point, the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I purposefully made it a point to when I came back into my office, moved back in, I rearranged almost everything.
Mm.
I rearranged where my desk was. I rearranged where the books were on my shelves. I rearranged where my knickknacks were. It's the exact same office with the exact same stuff. It just looks different.
Yeah.
But I tell you, it really kind of made it feel brand new.
Mm.
And it was almost like a fresh start almost. I had never quit doing the work. I was still coming to work every day. I was just working out of a different room. But moving back into my office completely rearranged just kind of breathed a sense of freshness into it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it was a very small thing, and it may sound silly to some people, but it actually helped me mentally a little bit. Maybe the change you need to make is really minor, something like that, a fresh a coat of paint on the walls, or rearranging something in your office, changing the way that you approach your day, or changing the way you approach your week.
Mm.
Maybe the change you need to make isn't so minor. Maybe quitting preaching isn't really what you need to do. Maybe you just need to quit your current job.
Mm.
I'm convinced that sometimes we aren't really burned out of ministry as much as we just get burned out of our current work. But we make the mistake, but we mistake rather being burned out of our current work with being burned out on ministry as a whole.
Mm.
And so maybe instead of quitting ministry altogether, I just need to find a new place to do ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, my purpose when I moved here, or that I moved to any congregation, has always been, this is where I want to spend the rest of my life. But like I said before, there were two places where that didn't work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not going to say this is absolutely going to be true. I hope it is. And it's still my intention that it's going to be that way here. But I hope that if it ever got to the point that something specific to here was severe enough to make me think about quitting ministry altogether, that I would be able to take a step back and realize that it's nothing to do with ministry as a whole. It's just about a specific situation in a specific place. And that if I can't overcome that here, then instead of quitting altogether, I can just go where that situation isn't going to be present, or at least where it's not going to be present in its current form.
Right.
It's probably still going to be present in some form or fashion, just not in the same way.
Yeah.
So just generally, though, think about changes that you can make. It may be minor, it may be major, but if it can keep you in ministry for honorable reasons, then I think it's something worth exploring.
Mm-hmm. I love what you're talking about, and even something like what you say, rearranging your office or something like that. So a minor tweak, and you said that it wasn't that big of a deal, but look at the dividends that it paid on your mental outlook. And hey, I mean, that's low hanging fruit right there, and if that'll progress you through, that's amazing. That's good stuff. Don't disparage that a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 5.
Last thing.
All right.
And it's last in order, but absolutely not in importance. And I hesitated to put this at the end because it should be the one thing that we're not only doing first, but the thing we're doing the whole way through. I just put it at the end because I couldn't think of any way better to close this conversation out, is we need to be praying about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to be praying about it. I've got a feeling that if God does or doesn't want us to continue in ministry, He's got a way to make that evident to us. I want to paraphrase something James said in James 4 for just a minute. Maybe the reason we struggle with proper direction in regard to continuing in ministry is because we're not asking for it. I think above any other thoughts on the matter concerning us continuing in ministry, God's thoughts on the matter should be our greatest concern. And so we need to ask ourselves, if we're really thinking about quitting, have we talked to Him about it? We can talk to friends or mentors. We can talk to our elders. We can talk to our spouse. We can talk to close friends in the congregation we're serving. That's all great. And I think they all need to be utilized. But at the end of the day, if we haven't talked to God, we haven't exhausted our resources. And so we need to be praying about it and extensively seeking His counsel and His direction. And like I said before, if He wants us to continue, or if He doesn't want us to continue in it, He's going to be able to show us that in some form or some fashion through His providence.
Yeah. Well, you said last but not least, but sometimes it's important to end with maybe what is the most impactful, just because that's sort of the note with which we, the note that we take with us as we move forward after this conversation ends. And I think that's exactly right. To pray about this, in addition to the other things that you mentioned there. If you're thinking about quitting, take some time away, find someone with whom you can speak, lean on your elders, see if there's any personal changes that you need to make in your thinking and in your routine, and certainly to pray about it. These have been some excellent, excellent thoughts. So, biggerbetterfaith.com. I meant to mention this a moment ago. That's where you can read some of Andy Brewer's writings, and biggerbetterfaith.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes on our website at thelightnetwork.tv. And by the way, that's where you can also find episode archives for Preachers in Training. And if you go all the way back to episode 3.
Oh, wow.
January the 8th of 2013.
And look at the topic.
That's right, avoiding burnout. And so I'm sorry, I've unintentionally backed you into a corner on the podcast. We're going to have to get you talking about something else.
I'm going to get a reputation if I'm not careful, Robert.
But you do it so well. That's the point. But there are many archived episodes, several hundred of them, in fact, on our website at thelightnetwork.tv. And you can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasting content if you're interested in doing that, so you never, ever miss a brand new episode. And, when Andy's on next time to talk about burnout or preacher discouragement, you don't want to miss it. We're doing video versions of the show now, and a lot of you are watching instead of listening, and that's wonderful to do. We're not abandoning the listening audience. We're not, putting all our eggs in the video basket, but it's just another way to offer the podcast. And so you can go to our YouTube channel, search for Preachers in Training or The Light Network or my name, Robert Hatfield, and you'll be able to get to that information there. We've got a playlist that aggregates all of those video Preachers in Training episodes there in one place. Mail, or rather I should say preachers at thelightnetwork.tv is the email address that you can send your comments, questions, episode ideas, and we'd love to hear those as well. Final parting thoughts before we end this episode of Preachers in Training. Back to our resident expert on discouragement and burnout.
Just don't give up. Keep going. And I think when we get to heaven one of these days, everything that we've had to struggle through, all the difficulties, all the trials, all the headaches, we're not going to look back and say it wasn't worth it.
That's right.
It will definitely be worth it all. And to see all the folks that we've been able to potentially help to get there is going to only add to the joy that we'll get to experience.
Amen. Fully appreciate that. Thank you, Andy, for being on the podcast today. We appreciate you, and thank you for listening to this episode of Preachers in Training. Join us next week when Steve Miller, with whom I get to work here at the Church of Christ at Gold Hill Road, joins us to talk about organizing gleanings from your reading. We're talking about research on the next episode of Preachers in Training. Until then, I'm Robert Hatfield. Let's go preach the Word.